People do feel incredibly frustrated that they're trapped, that they have no choice. But when they look at the alternative, if it's more anxiety provoking and impossible for that point in time, then there's a choice there not to put themselves through even more suffering, that we can't avoid suffering. And that's what people are trying to avoid. They're trying to avoid regret and suffering. However, these are parts of life that are universal. We get to choose which suffering.
Hi, I'm Dr Jodi Richardson, and this is Well, Hello Anxiety. In a world that often moves too fast, we're here to pause, breathe, and understand anxiety together. Each episode will explore practical strategies, share honest conversations, and uncover the science behind anxiety and well-being, all while creating a space where it's okay to not be okay. Let's continue this journey together. Have you ever wondered why anxiety seems to follow us even when life is going well? We do know that it is a part of life and it shows up around the things that we care about. But sometimes those what ifs have a really tight grip. Sometimes anxiety can just feel like it's wrapping us up and making life even harder than it is. So today, I'm joined by Dr Amanda Ferguson. I first met Dr Ferguson as a guest on her podcast, Psyched for Life, and we'll put the links to all of her details in the show notes, of course. But it's time for me to turn the tables, and I've invited Amanda to be my guest. She is a psychologist, she's a clinical hypnotherapist, and she's actually an expert in recovery, personal development, and goal achievement. So this is the kind of woman that we want to have in our corner. We're very lucky to have some time with her today. She has over 33 years of experience in private practice, in public speaking and mentoring. And understandably, with years of experience and wisdom, she brings really deep insights into the universal dilemmas that we all face. So today we're actually going to explore anxiety and how it's often tied to deeper questions about life, identity, and meaning. So we want to really talk about how can we relate to anxiety in healthier ways, in different ways that are more constructive, because it is a part of life. And so I'm so delighted to have this conversation today. Amanda is joining us from Mona Vale in New South Wales here in Australia. And Amanda, it's just so lovely to have you as my guest today. So you get to answer the questions rather than ask them, but feel free to ask me questions too, of course.
Thank you so much, Jodi. It's such a pleasure to speak with you and your listeners.
Oh, thank you. And let's dive in, because I love that we can talk about this today, because one of the things that we know is that anxiety can really bubble up and boil over around existential dilemmas. And this is something that you and I understand, but it's something that maybe listeners have heard about. Some will have a good understanding of what an existential dilemma is. Others will be thinking, yeah, I really always wanted to understand a bit more about that. So can we first start by talking about what is an existential dilemma? And, you know, how common it is. It's universal. We all face it. But often when we're feeling it, we feel like we can be alone.
Oh, absolutely. As you said, it's the universal experience of existence that humans all grapple with. And there are said to be 5 pillars or dilemmas or concepts that really will eventually be faced as a form of anxiety, as you said. And one of them is freedom versus responsibility.
Yes.
And that can look like independence versus interdependence or dependence. And I can explain that further as well. For instance, just think of being an employee versus being an entrepreneur. One will suffer frustration, which dependence always brings, and responsibility brings frustration. Independence brings anxiety. And so that's one of the main dilemmas we all face. Another one is meaning in a meaningless world, and seeking meaning, particularly through suffering, when an expanded sense of meaning and understanding of what life's about for us individually is needed in order to deal with suffering, which is a main experience humans all universally have to undergo in some way or another.
Yes.
Another is isolation. versus the unavoidable loneliness that you can feel more lonely in a crowd than on the top of a mountain on your own.
Yeah.
You know, that phenomenon of what is loneliness and what's it all about. And then ultimately the inevitable death of ourselves and of all of our loved ones, and sometimes untimely so, as in the fact that some children will die. So these are 5 pillars of existence that are said to be existentialism and can lead to existential crisis, which is why a lot of people consult me in crisis over any of these areas of life.
Oh my goodness. Do you know what? I've never had it explained to me like that. And so to recap, we've got freedom versus responsibility, independence versus interdependence, meaning and seeking meaning being the third, isolation versus loneliness, and death. One of the things that you said earlier is that these are things that we're all going to face, and many of us have already faced some, if not all of these. And so is existential really just about our existence? Yes.
Absolutely. That our existence, for all of us, we have this in common. And so it's a uniting kind of concept as well, because it doesn't discriminate between wealthy and unwealthy people or people of different race and ethnicity. All of us are bound by the same principles that operate as part of being a human being and existing.
It is so hard, isn't it? Some days are so difficult. Life can be really tough, and it's common. That's humanity. That's being a person is to be anxious is to be human. To have struggle is to be human. But these kind of deeper challenges are they? Is it fair to say that a lot of people sort of really internalize them, and because you don't hear people generally speaking about these kinds of struggles and how they're trying to grapple with it. How do you have people come to you to talk about when they're experiencing a crisis? But I imagine people don't come to you and saying, I'm having an existential crisis related to, isolation versus loneliness. So what do people often present like? What can our listeners look out for to kind of help them understand when they might be struggling deeply with one of these pillars of existential dilemmas?
That's such a good point, because it's actually when I do point out that they are having an existential crisis that it's common, because it's a thing that all humans have to deal with, that they realise, oh, I can't avoid this, because that's the thing. People are like, how do I avoid this?
Yes.
I'm like, oh, you can't.
Sorry. But glad you're here. Let's talk about it.
That's right. We have to sort it out.
Yeah.
So I've got a friend who I was thinking about before our chat this morning, who many, many years ago left a very abusive marriage with 2 little children, and she has a very high-powered job, and it's high pressure. And she was really grappling with that first dilemma of freedom versus responsibility, or independence versus dependence. And she's dependent on this organisation, but she was craving her independence. With 2 little children, however, the responsibility, and even though she was highly anxious at the beginning of every year, that she had to challenge the promotion process every single year, and there was high anxiety, the anxiety of leaving was significantly higher. Right. So the grappling with the anxiety of each side of that dilemma was an existential crisis that she really didn't see until I actually said to her, well, this is just one of those times where you have to just make a decision, and whatever's right for you for this year might not be right for the next year. As the kids get older, you might go the other way and choose more freedom. But at the moment, she said, I can't do it. I have to just choose the anxiety and frustration of staying with the politics and pressure of this big organisation. So I think when you can sort of simplify people's problems down to these dilemmas like that, then they can see, oh, it's really simple. I can't avoid anxiety. I can't avoid frustration. I just have to choose which one is actually the most sensible for this year. For
the next right step, isn't it? It's taking the next right step and knowing that that in another time down the road, the next right step might be a different choice. I love the word choice, and I love the way you've phrased that, because people must inevitably come to you just feeling overwhelmed, anxious, and knowing that they need support. And you tease out, and no doubt different clients, of course, have different challenges and different dilemmas underpinning kind of the struggles that they're experiencing. I think it's really empowering to ultimately arrive at a place where we know we can choose, even though you might feel like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, especially because there's a lot of uncertainty and unpredictability when we're stepping into an unknown. And in this example, leaving a paycheck, and leaving a role where you've got that stability and that predictability. But I think choice is something that often people feel they don't have. Can we speak to that a little bit about perhaps sometimes, even though the choices are difficult, that there is still an option to have some agency over what's going to happen next?
Absolutely. And that's where she was feeling, and people do feel incredibly frustrated that they're trapped, that they have no choice. But when they look at the alternative, if it's more anxiety provoking and impossible for that point in time, then there's a choice there not to put themselves through even more suffering, that we can't avoid suffering. And that's what people are trying to avoid. They're trying to avoid regret and suffering. However, these are parts of life that are universal. We get to choose which suffering. There's a great phrase, tough choices make for an easy life. Easy choices make for a tough life. So when we do the tough work of really facing the ultimate choice we have and what's going to be most sensible, it does make life as easy as it can be, given where we're at, given that life inevitably is not easy. Choosing to do the hard work is the only way forward to make a very successful life. I actually think these are exciting choices.
Yes.
And they're how we grow, and particularly when we face up to the fact that most of us really are in the driver's seat, and reframing it that way, that honestly we can all give up at a moment's notice and just opt out of life even, and all of us will face that dilemma at some point of facing our own death and our own choice, even in that. So that's the ultimate choice, to stay on the planet.
It really is. And I think it's empowering, not to take away from the fact that it's terribly, terribly distressing, some of the choices that people listening will be facing and thinking about are extremely difficult. But I do agree with you. I do think it's comforting. I do think it's empowering to know that there is choice. And sometimes you might make a decision, but enacting it, I'm thinking about somebody who might be in an abusive relationship, for example, that might make a choice, but then there's time and planning and supports that need to go into place. So I'm not trying to simplify this or take away at all from the fact that we know that some of you are really, really struggling. I also do think it helps to, what you said before about we can't avoid suffering and we can't avoid regret, because we do worry, don't we, that am I making the right choice? And it can feel like, gosh, if I take this step, it's like the bridge is going to fall away from behind me and there's no turning around. And, of course, we can't wind back the hands of time. But I am a true believer that you've got to make a decision. Don't take forever to make it, because sometimes the opportunities can pass us by. But that I don't feel like anything's ever wasted. Again, I feel like I've really got to justify this today, Amanda, because I know some people, somebody who's in a terrible personal or a tragic personal situation. I'm not trying to say that that's, that there's a silver lining or that there's a lesson in everything, but I do think that any experience that we go through, it teaches us so much about ourselves, about the world, and it helps us to make decisions moving forward. I hope I've clarified that well.
Oh, I agree completely that we're not talking about, how you can eventually reduce or diminish or even take away suffering. It's how you deal with it. And that we all will have to deal with suffering.
Yeah.
And one of the things I help people with is, which is the decision you think you'll regret the least?
Right.
Rather than I don't want to have regrets, because you can't avoid regrets when you're making a major decision. And as you're saying, it's better to make a decision than actually completely avoid making a decision and continue to avoid. In fact, I often say to people, make the decision one way, then make it the other way, then make it back the other way, and jump either side of the fence as many times as it takes until you actually land on one side of the fence. Don't sit on the fence, because you'll never make the decision by just staying on the fence.
No, you can't. We don't know, and that's what makes making decisions so hard. So you're not going to know, and it's easy to wait, and it's probably more comfortable to wait until you feel more certain with making a decision, isn't it? But like you say, it's even, I guess, just that kind of cognitive exercise, that thought exercise of, right, I've made this decision, right, what does that feel like? What's that going to look like? What does that mean? Yeah. It's a bit like smelling different perfumes and put the coffee beans in between. Make the decision, experience it as best you can from your imagination. Take a break, and the next day try the other, like you suggested. And, you know, we hate to suffer, and it's so painful. It's so painful, isn't it? And all of these existential dilemmas, I'm just going right back to my notes, that you know, the hardest... Well, I mean, I say the hardest being death, but there's so much pain and suffering with any of these, which is essentially why these are the 5 pillars that we're talking about. You know, grief and loss is so difficult, isn't it? And can we talk a little bit about, for somebody who might be facing that as a dilemma in their own life, or that of a loved one who's very close to them? Yeah, it's just one of the most difficult parts of life in my mind. What are your thoughts?
Well, one of the first sort of simple phrases is often used at funerals, for instance, that grief is the price of love. And if you really respect and love that person, you're willing to pay the price. And there's always a price at the other end of love, whether it's divorce, whether it's death. There's always a price. And so love, certainly as an adult, is not for the faint-hearted. You step into it knowing that there will always be a cost. But I think this relates also to the need for us to find meaning in life, that dealing with death and loss in a way that makes sense, that yes, it's the price, but also what does it lead to? What's it about? What is life ultimately about? And none of us can say for sure we've got the answer, but we need to feel that it makes some sense. You know, for instance, when I've seen people die at the end of their life, it makes sense that death is the next step, that release comes, that someone in terrible suffering and pain physically can be released from that as well. That makes sense to me. You know, I worked at the Cancer Council in my 30s, and on one day I was at the palliative care hospice where a woman was dying with absolute relief on her face and peace and gratitude. And that night I went to do my voluntary work at the Women's Refuge, where a woman had discovered she had her 3rd pregnancy under the poverty line, and the pain and suffering of discovering she was pregnant at 2 ends of life was just showing me you can't measure pain.
No.
And loss and grief, you can't measure it.
You can't. You can't. You've been witness to these experiences of people in their hardest moments. What helps a person, like the woman that you were speaking about, their 3rd pregnancy under the poverty line, goodness. What can we do to support people in our lives and to support ourselves when we are the ones that are experiencing a dilemma of that kind and just feeling like the suffering is too great to bear?
Well, in that case, we had a group of women at the refuge, and I was doing art therapy with them in a group setting, and the women came together for those purposes to support each other.
Yeah.
And so I think groups of people, men, I encourage to find groups for men as well, because we have similar problems usually in the same gender and the same kind of age groups, although mentoring from older people in the tribe and reaching out to younger people is very important as well. So I think community, friends, if you don't have friends, and even if you do and they're not really able to understand, you need people who do understand. professional support, of course, and if needed as well.
Thank you. It's the people around us can help carry us through our darkest and hardest of days, can't they?
Absolutely. And there's always Lifeline in Australia as well, of course.
Yes.
13, 11, 14. So there's lots of resources. We're in a very lucky country where we have so many resources.
We do. We really do. I'm curious, Amanda, as a professional who works and supports, and you are one of those guides and supports, and you're a therapist, of course, how do you look after yourself? Because what you've seen and been a witness to, it must take its toll over time. How do you care for yourself to cope in the role that you're in, which is such a generous and compassionate role in your profession? How do you look after you?
Well, I was lucky enough to face most, if not probably all of those dilemmas that we've just mentioned of existentialism, to work out what suits me, what works for me in terms of filling my cup, making sense to me, and individualism, independence, meaning, all these things really matter to me and what I think life's all about. So nature is my go-to, my first go-to, and it suits my type of personality. And I think knowing yourself is the key answer to these questions. Knowing myself, that nature, the ocean in particular, walking on the beach, going into the ocean, I'm a sailor, getting on my boat, those things, time to myself, because giving to people means I then need to give to myself. Hanging out with myself is so important, and with nature. Oh my goodness. Listeners can't see me smiling, but just knowing, like you said, knowing yourself, knowing what you need, listening, giving ourselves the time to be able to really reflect on, how am I going? Where am I at? What do I need? And do you know, in the summer, look, I was in the ice bath with a friend the other day, Eva Harrod, who's been a guest here on the podcast. We sauntered an ice bath together, and oh my goodness me, it was painful. I will do that, but I don't love it. But I love the water in the summer. And some days I just feel like I've got to get in the water. I've just got to, I'll pick up the kids from school and I'm like, I've got to get in the water. Who's coming? And, you know, depending on sport and homework and all that, sometimes I just don't want to. But I will drop them home, get my bathers on, grab my towel and just head down the beach and just spend 10 minutes in the water by myself. And I know, like, that's why I was grinning, I think, because when you said about the water, we've got to know our thing and give ourselves the time to access it, because life, as we started by saying at the beginning of the episode, it's so, you know, different stages of life can be really difficult, and knowing how to look after ourselves is important. Amanda, gosh, we're just getting started, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say farewell to you, and we're going to pick this back up again next week, because one of the things I really want to talk with you about is how to disarm and deal with the tight grip of those what ifs of anxiety. So thank you so much for your time in this episode. We've only just begun, so I can't wait to get stuck in and talk to you again next week. Such a pleasure, Jodi. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing this time with me on Well, Hello Anxiety. Remember, understanding anxiety is the first step to managing it. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. Take things one moment at a time. Focus on what you can control and know that you are not alone on this journey. If you found value in today's episode, please share it with someone who might need to hear it too. I'm Dr. Jodi Richardson, and I'll meet you right back here next week.